All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Sigma's May webinar. We are going to get started. My name is Helen. I'm the marketing coordinator at Sigma Assessment Systems, and I will be co-facilitating your webinar today with my colleague, Dr. Ariana Thompson. For those of you who are new to Sigma, we're a professional services firm that offers talent development, succession planning, and psychological assessments for organizations like yours, most likely, who are looking to build their internal talent pools. We've been in business for over 50 years, so as a company, we have quite a bit of experience, and today we're here to talk to you a little bit about succession planning. So we have about 60 minutes together. For the first 45 minutes or so, Ariana will walk you through the webinar content and introduce you to succession planning, and then we'll save 15 minutes at the end to go through questions. So feel free to use the Q&A to submit those questions. And you're also welcome to contact us afterwards via email. But for now, use the Q&A box. Don't be shy. That's what it's there for. And if we don't have time to get to any of those questions, we're happy to follow up via email as well. We are recording the session, and we will share a copy of the recording and the slides to all attendees afterwards. So stay tuned for that. And now, without any further ado, I will introduce you to our presenter, and we'll get started. Dr. Ariana Thompson is a senior leadership consultant. She believes in positively transforming the modern-day workplace through thought-provoking, evidence-based insights. Ariana is a subject matter expert in executive leadership, succession management, wellness cultures, and employee growth. In her work here at Sigma, she supports the executive teams with succession planning and leadership development and assessments. So we're in great hands today, and I'll pass it off to you now, Ariana, to get started.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar, How to Build a Comprehensive Succession Plan. I'm happy to be with you here today. And just so you know, we'll be offering this exact webinar every other month in case you have anyone else on your team who would like to catch our next session. You can just send them over to our Sigma website and we'll have more of these sessions every other month for you. With that, let's jump in. So in terms of an agenda for our session today, we'll begin by going over the basics. And this is covering what is succession planning, what is the difference between succession planning with more traditional replacement hiring, and why is succession planning important and worth the investment. Next, we're going to comprehensively walk you through the succession planning process at Sigma. We have a 6-step process based in best practices that we're excited to share with you. And lastly, we'll wrap up with some tips such as common hurdles to implementation and why you might like to work with consultants. What is succession planning? Succession planning is the process of identifying and developing internal talent to fill critical roles for when vacancies occur. So this is kind of a mouthful of a definition, so I want to point out some important words here that you'll want to focus on, which is first and foremost, identifying talent and then taking the time and effort to develop them. And then this is critical for when you have those vacancies in your organization, which we'll talk more about, so that you have people on the go, ready to go, fully developed to take over a role if there is an absence. This is really important for supporting operations, making sure that there aren't any operational gaps that could slow down business, and this could happen across many roles in the organization, but we'll talk more about critical roles later. And a robust succession plan has a few core features. First off, it's goal-oriented. It has a reason for existing and a purpose. So the purpose is truly to develop the next generation of leaders within your organization and to make sure that you're taking steps to continue that plan over time. A succession plan is also ongoing over time, so it should be a living, breathing document that you come back to every year and you update whenever somebody leaves, when someone has been promoted, if someone has new skills, that puts them in a different position to be ready for the next position and things like that. So for this reason, it's important to consider your succession plan as flexible to changing needs, circumstances, or priorities. And furthermore, it's important that you actually take the time to come back and methodically revisit your succession plan every 6 months to every year, depending on how much fluctuation there is in your talent in your organization. And a good succession plan does a number of things for the organization. It builds a pool of qualified candidates for each critical role. So this is really important, as that's the whole point of the succession plan, is to make sure that you are developing candidates who are going to be ready to step into the role in the future. So this makes it really proactive, and it involves a lot of employee engagement. And through this process, you're providing opportunities for employee growth and development. And that has been a top trend in culture recently. We're seeing a lot of data emerging that one thing that especially younger generations in the workplace want and are looking for is that growth and development. They want to feel like they are growing their skills, their abilities, they're learning more, and that the organization is investing resources in their development. And this can be a reason that if this is not present, they leave the organization in pursuit of more opportunity. And lastly, a good succession plan will increase the confidence in the company's ability to fill vacant roles. In other words, you're going to create a leadership pipeline where you constantly have the next person ready to go more or less. Of course, we can never necessarily be 100% for a role we haven't taken. There's still embodying the role once you're on the job, but you want to have people ready to go so you're not facing any operational vacancies that could cause challenges to your organizational functioning. And this can create a culture of confidence, as well as people within the organization aren't experiencing a sense of chaos or even at a lesser level ambiguity around who's filling certain positions and who is holding that formal authority in that position. So all this to say, succession plans are important because they provide your company with a roadmap for continuity when changes occur. And changes do occur. We do know that most people stay with a role for about an average of 2 years. And this is a lot different than how it was in past generations. People are turning over, and you want to try and mitigate that turnover, but also prepare for it in the case that it does happen, or you have other senior executives or other senior members of your organization who might face retirement as well. All right, so we're going to start now with a poll. I'll be asking a few polls throughout the session just to generate some engagement and hear from you about where you're currently at. So in order to join this poll, what we'll have you do is join at menti.com. Helen, if you don't mind putting that in the chat for us, you can look for that in the chat. And then once you get to menti.com, you're going to want to use the code 16703466. So because this is our first poll of this session, I'll give everyone just a minute to go to their browser, go to menti.com, and then add in this code. Thank you so much for your participation. And then once you get there, you'll be answering this question: does your company have a succession plan? Some of the answers are yes, we have a formal succession planning process that is used across the organization. Next is most of our teams are engaging in succession planning, but there is no standardized process. Next is we have a few replacements in mind for people who may be leaving soon. And the last couple are we haven't thought about succession at all and not sure. So I don't think we have too many responses yet. So if you want to navigate to menti.com and use the code, we'll wait just a bit longer. Wonderful, I'm seeing our first response.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I'll just pop on and say, I don't think we're actually able to chat to everyone. So we'll have to make you do the heavy lifting and type that little URL in. Hopefully it works for you.
And we will be using these polls throughout the session, so I'll just wait just a bit longer, see if we can capture any more responses. Thank you all for helping us get to the polls here. All right, so what I'm seeing is 14% does have a succession planning process across the organization, so that's wonderful. Great to see that. And then about a third of the audience today has some succession planning in place in their teams, but not standardized. Another third has a few replacements in mind for people who may be leaving soon. And then another 11% have not thought about succession at all or is not sure. So thank you so much for your participation. So next we want to help talk through what is the difference between replacement hiring and succession planning. You may not have heard of this term before, replacement hiring, but it tends to be what most organizations are engaging with when it comes to doing hiring across the organization. And some characteristics of replacement hiring is that the timing tends to be more reactive and you're choosing the next best person available. And oftentimes, because you're kind of in a rush, you're usually just trying to replicate the incumbent. This is what this person did. How can we find someone just like them? Often leverages only input from the incumbent and the supervisor. And honestly, often it doesn't even use information from the incumbent because they may have already left the organization at this point. You select one successor and it reduces objectivity because it's somewhat based on being at the right place at the right time. So the process is just more reactive, hiring done as needed. So this is in contrast with succession planning, which is very strategic and proactive, where you're methodically preparing the best candidate for the role. And you can choose the best candidate, even if they are different than the incumbent, so long as they have the necessary knowledge, skills, and abilities to complete the role. In an ideal situation, you're even getting information from multiple sources in the organization around how do we need this person to function in this role and what do they need to do to have success. And that often can include competency modeling as well. So from this process, you can create a whole bench of successors and start developing all of them from the role. And when the vacancy occurs, selection and promotion can occur more objectively based on merits and capability. Therefore, the process is more ongoing and hiring is more integrated with other workforce systems such as recruitment, development, and even diversity initiatives. So succession planning is a lot more strategic and it gives you more of a pool of candidates to choose the best one at the time the vacancy occurs. So our next poll question for you is succession planning or replacement hiring? What does your team do? And again, you can use the same poll at menti.com with code 16703466. And I'll give it about 30 more seconds. All right, so what we're seeing here is that we have a mix as the predominant selection here. Around 90% of the audience today, just dropped to 80%, has done some succession planning and some replacement hiring. So that's pretty interesting. We often don't see this number being so high. So it's great to see some of those of you in the audience are doing succession planning alongside some replacement hiring, which does often happen in organizations. And then we have 20% doing that more traditional replacement hiring. So thank you again for letting us know. So why does succession planning matter? Turnover is inevitable in all organizations, like I mentioned earlier, so succession planning can help you prepare for vacancies well in advance. Succession planning will help your organization to retain organization-specific knowledge. So that's one big reason why organizations are encouraged to do succession planning, is to make sure that institutional knowledge is not lost. Or if someone is going to be leaving the organization, at least you can capture their knowledge ideally before they go. But with succession planning, you actually want to do that training and mentoring to train them up on what you know before you go. So that it can be a big factor, and something that if it's not done, you almost have to start over with some of your processes in certain key roles. So that's a big reason to do succession planning. The next two are ones we kind of mentioned earlier, but it's to motivate employees to engage in succession planning while creating a culture of growth and development. So it is really motivating and engaging for employee to feel like they could step up to the next role in an organization, that an organization cares about their personal growth and development and wants to see them as a leader in their organization. This can be in contrast with organizations that have a culture of hiring out at the higher levels of senior leadership or other levels within the organization. And employees could get the message that I might not even have the opportunity to grow because we just hire from the outside whenever we need it. But if you do this well, you can attract and retain staff long term, and you can also improve objective decision making and the objectivity of the selection of leaders. So leaders being selected and promoted that represent other ranks of employees, and people see themselves in those leaders and see that they also may have the same opportunities in the future. So with that, we're going to jump into sharing our Sigma succession planning process. Again, this is our best practices 6-step process that we use with many organizations to support their succession planning process. So I'm just going to briefly mention these 6 steps, and then I'll talk through them all in greater depth in just a moment. So these are to identify critical roles, build success profiles, nominate successors, assess development needs, begin developing talent, and measure progress along the way. I also want to note that on the right-hand side, we have a number of templates that can be used to support each of these steps. And these templates are actually free and available on our Sigma website if you're interested in browsing the templates we have available that you could use for free to support succession planning in your organization. So let's start at the very beginning of our succession planning process. This is identifying critical roles. The goal here is to identify the roles in your organization that you should target to be a part of your succession planning program. And critical roles can be thought of as any role within the organization where a vacancy poses a severe and immediate risk to operations. So in succession planning, we often do start with upper management and leadership positions. Those are critical and are a worthwhile place to start. Anyone on your C-suite, especially a CEO, is one of the most common roles to do succession plans for, as well as other senior leaders. But we do encourage you to think a little bit broader as you think about critical roles within your organization, because really anyone across many departments could be considered a critical role. So for example, if you are an organization that has software as one of your main service offerings, perhaps one of your senior software engineers is actually a critical role despite being an individual contributor, as if they left the organization, they might you may lose a lot of institutional knowledge and not have someone ready to step in if it's needed in order for your business continuity to be seamless. So for that reason, we want you to, in this time, cast a wide net and think of any role that might truly be critical to the functioning of your organization, and think strategically about who you might like to include in your succession plan. Again, so other roles could include administrative staff that help your organization function smoothly, or areas with high dependencies or little overlap in skill sets. At the very start of this process, we encourage you to consider both essential people and essential positions. However, as we get further in the process, we really want to just focus on the role and less on the people, as the person who's in that role could change over time. So once you've identified critical roles, you can begin your succession planning process for these critical roles. So the goal at this stage of building success profiles is to describe the competencies that are necessary to perform each critical role. So you really want to understand, what does it take to do this role successfully? So I'll show you what a Sigma success profile looks like in just a second. But what is important when creating success profiles is to consider behaviors that are important for the role, for success in the organization more broadly, and success in the role both now and into the future. So a success profile, it goes a little bit beyond a job description, but doesn't have as much description about every single task compared to a job description. So let me show you. Here is a sample success profile that was adapted from one of our current clients. And here at the top, I'll just walk you through some of the components. We have the succession position, which in this case is an HR director. The current incumbent, we'll call her Jane Smith, and the expected vacancy will be this year, which makes her a top priority for succession planning. We then have some places where you can add about the position demographics. So she's in Austin, Texas, level 2 in the Department of Human Resources. And then you see we grab some of these position criteria that you would see on a common or the typical job description, such as having a bachelor's in HR or related field, having 8+ years of experience in HR, and then other skills and knowledge and abilities, such as leveraging HR software, knowing about benefits and payroll, having experience leading teams, designing HR programs, and similar. And typically we would have that all the way filled out with all the skills, knowledge, and duties and experiences that that individual would have. Then we also do competency modeling by getting the incumbent's perspective on their role, as well as typically 4 or 5 other inputs from people who are close to that role to give their perspective as well. Therefore, we end up with this success profile that has both leadership competencies and core role competencies. So again, this would be used for most cases, senior leaders, and then next level of senior leaders as well, so maybe middle management. And in this case, we have some leadership competencies that this HR director would need to have, such as decisiveness and objectivity. But there are also core role competencies that she needs to have for her position of an HR director. So you see things like attracting staff, developing and coaching others, and valuing diversity. On our Sigma success profiles, we also have future-oriented competencies. So we work with leadership teams to understand where they're going in the future and what challenges they might face, and develop future core and leadership role competencies for those. So for her role as a general leader on the team, her future competencies would be social astuteness and technical orientation. But for her role as an HR director, she would need to focus on vision and client customer focus. So this is a completed success profile, and I hope it gives you a better idea of how you might understand the competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities that you'll need to have in this critical role of an HR director and its high priority. So once you have identified your critical roles and built a success profile, the third step is to begin nominating successors. At this point, the goal is to consider potential candidates for each critical role, now that you know what it takes to complete the role and the skills needed to do so. So at this point, we would challenge you not to only include direct reports, but look more cross-functionally on other teams or in other roles for people who might be considered. We often do see this with our clients, that in many cases, depending on the specialization, it is possible for one person to be a great fit for another department in a leadership role. Also, think of a leadership pipeline feeding into your role rather than simply the next successor. So there's potential that someone on your succession bench could leave, and then you would need somebody else. Or oftentimes we actually see that when we have a first gut reaction to who should be next, it could be a little bit different than when we really analyze all the potential talent, their strengths and development areas, and who could truly be the best next candidate. So having an open mind can be important at this step. Lastly, you can consider candidates who might be ready for the role soon, more immediately, as well as those who might be ready in the moderate to long-term future, and that will also depend on the priority level of your succession candidate. For example, if you have a leader who just started their role and they might be there for 5 years, then you can have candidates on the bench who could take up to 5 years to be ready for that role. In contrast with the HR position that we just saw, since she'll be leaving this year, you'd need a candidate who might be up and going within a year's time with development. So now I want to show you what this might look like if you were filling it out on a form. And this is our succession bench template. So again, we have that same succession position of the HR director with the current incumbent of Jane Smith, the expected vacancy 2024, making her a top 5-star priority. And at this time, we'll say that she's gone through a succession planning process of nominating successors. And we have 2 level A candidates and 1 level B candidate in 0 level C. So let me explain what those are. Level C would be someone who is ready in 5+ years, so beyond 5 years. A level B candidate is someone who would be ready in 3 to 5 years, and a level A candidate is someone who would be ready in 0 to 3 years. So we see that we have Jerry Cole and Corazon as level A and Sarah Jensen as level B. Next, we put the progression to succession position. So let's say that they've been trying to do they have been doing succession planning for some time, since dating back to 2022. And you can see that you can actually move as a candidate throughout this time. So Sarah Jensen was added in June of 2023 as a level B candidate, and Corazon was a level B candidate in April of 2022, but has since moved up to a level A in June of 2023. So this just goes to show that we do like to track the progress over time, and you can move from a level B candidate to a level A candidate over time and with additional development. Lastly, in this last right-hand side of the form, we track whether or not the next position will be the succession position. So in the case of Jerry and Katura, they are the current position is an HR manager, and the next position would be an HR director. But in the case of Sarah is currently an HR lead and would need to become an HR manager before being eligible for the HR director position. And her readiness for that next position is 6 months. So I hope this helps to show you what a succession bench can look like, some of the different metrics that we track at Sigma. And again, you can find some of these resources on our website if you're interested. All right, moving along in our process, we are at step 4 out of 6. At this point, we've identified critical roles, built success profiles, nominated successors, and now we're ready to assess the developmental needs of the nominated assessors. So at this time, the goal is to identify candidates' development needs. At this time, assessing the development needs really serves a number of purposes, including determining their areas of strength and developmental priorities, especially related to that success profile. So how do their current strengths and development areas line up with the skills that they're going to need in their next role? This helps you to validate each candidate's position on the bench. Are they truly a level A candidate, or are they more of a level B or opposite? You can help see how much time they might need to get up to speed to be ready for a new position in the future. And it also provides the ability to assess a baseline of skill against which you can evaluate coaching or development success. So if you put someone through a leadership development program, do their skills change? If they get one-on-one coaching, how does that support their skill development? And we think that it's really helpful to have scientifically validated assessments that measure relevant skills to the succession position. So there's a few different things you can do at this time. You can do a talent review where you methodically rate each candidate's ability to fulfill different leadership competencies, such as how do they take initiative in the organization? How is their current role position and performance? How well do they align with the strategic needs and mission of the organization? How are their interpersonal relationships? But then we also recommend a more standard leadership assessment as well. At Sigma Assessment Systems, we have an LSPR assessment, that is the Leadership Skills Profile Revised Assessment, that captures 50 leadership competencies that we used, some of which on that success profile you saw. So it allows for direct mapping between an assessment output with the success profile, and it just provides another objective measure. And that assessment and a leadership assessment often provides a report that can be used for development as well, as people get more self-awareness around their own areas of strength and development. So once you've identified the areas of strength and opportunity for each candidate, you can then begin to develop talent. So the goal here is to use mentoring and coaching to take potential candidates and guide their development into capable successors. So developing talent involves helping candidates to determine their developmental priorities, actually helping them to find specific opportunities that will grow those developmental priorities where they can learn and practice new skills. That can include things like stretch assignments, and then overcoming obstacles and challenges to successful development. So ideally, they have a leader that they can talk to and have one-on-one sessions with for coaching and feedback, although leveraging outside coaching is also very helpful. We do offer coaching at Sigma Assessment Systems if you're ever interested. So here is our developmental tracker that we recommend organizations use to keep track of what they're actually doing in terms of planned development activities. So if we were doing this for the succession position of HR director for Jane Smith, we would put her 3 succession candidates from her succession bench here, along with their levels, and then actually plan some developmental activities for each. So because both Jerry and Katura are level A candidates, we would recommend job shadowing and one-on-one coaching. This is because they're level A candidates, and this is a high priority role. So investing in the growth of these individuals is likely to serve the organization. However, because Sarah Jensen is a level B candidate and still has another role to take on before she would be eligible for this one, we would recommend more self-directed learning. You could do online learning platforms, books and resources, a certification, anything like that would be a great self-directed learning method. And then for all of these candidates, we would recommend group training where you can build a culture of leadership and skills at the group level, and it helps create a shared dialogue around some training opportunities and the skills learned in those sessions. And finally, we've made it to our final step in the process, which is to measure progress. The goal here is to track the progress of your succession success, boost engagement, and quantify success. So the best metrics to use are those that reflect success in your organization. For example, if you are facing a high level of turnover and you want to start building a culture of development that supports succession planning, maybe you can track the rate of turnover every year and see that your efforts to engage employees and promote development are actually reducing turnover over time. So that might be a metric that would be relevant to your organization in that scenario. And you really want to track your baseline measurements before you even begin your succession planning efforts and talent development if you're not already engaging in talent development. You can record these metrics as a baseline and then update your metrics every 6 months to a year to evaluate progress. Other common metrics can include rates of engagement on engagement surveys or the percent of roles that are filled internally. Another one could be how long a vacancy stays vacant. So if it's only a week, that's not bad. If it's 3 months, that might pose a concern to your organization. So that wraps up our 6 steps. So now we'll go to the final part of this webinar where we'll be discussing common pitfalls and strategies in succession before opening it up to a Q&A. So common pitfalls in succession planning. These are some mistakes that organizations make when creating their succession plan. The most common one is focusing exclusively on the executive level. As mentioned, this is a great place to start. We need to make sure that there are succession plans in place for senior leaders as they are at the helm of the organization. But once you successfully complete succession planning for the executive level, it's great to move down to the next level and consider other critical roles, as we mentioned earlier, for roles that might need to be considered. So you're not too zeroed in only on the executive level, but missing out on planning for other roles that could be really critical for the organization. The next pitfall is keeping the succession plan a secret. It can be helpful for people in the organization to know that you are planning for your leadership pipeline, that you are invested in talent development, that you are thinking about who might be the next leader in your organization across many roles. So it can be framed a number of ways, but we recommend that you do practice transparency around your succession planning and development efforts. The next pitfall is delegating all tasks to HR. One or two people in HR cannot successfully manage the entire succession plan unless they have a lot of top-down support already. But typically, if everything is delegated to HR, you're missing the opportunity to include leadership, get their input, get their expertise, and show that there is a commitment top-down in the organization to employee development. Next one is failing to update the document over time. So people do come and go from the organization. There are changes, and in order to have a good succession plan, you must come back and make updates over time. Otherwise, it can quickly become an antiquated document that no longer serves its original purpose. And then lastly is strategic plan implementation. Let's say you've gone through the first couple of phases, you identified your critical roles, and you built a success profile, but then you don't get buy-in for development across employee development and things like that. That is a challenge to your succession plan because you're not building up the candidates to be ready for that position. So that's something we see a lot. Related to this challenge, our greatest hurdle being implementation, we see that 67% of well-formulated strategic plans fail in organizations due to poor execution, 2/3. Additionally, we see that 1 in 3 leaders rate their company as poor or very poor at implementing strategic plans. So we do want to ask you, how successful is your team at implementing strategic plans at your organization? Oh, I don't see any responses yet, so you can again go to menti.com and use that code 16703466. I'll give it another 30 seconds. All right. So what we see here is that 0% always falls through on strategic plans. So very interesting, and just showing the challenge that we all face fully following through on our organizational strategic plans. Another 22% say we sometimes follow through. 33%, a third, says we create strategic plans but rarely follow through. So they're creating it, but the follow through is challenging. 22% says we don't really create strategic plans at all, or 22%, another 22% is not sure. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. So what we saw is not uncommon. Many companies, well, some companies take the time to develop a succession plan in the first place, but not all. But further than that, many fail to develop talent and adequately prepare each candidate for a future position, even when they've taken that time to set up the strategic plan in the first place. And if this is something that you face in your organization, this is when working with a consultant can help. Some benefits of working with a consultant on your strategic succession planning is that first and foremost, consultants can give you back time. Time tends to be one of the biggest obstacles that we see in terms of people being able to create and follow through with their succession plan. But you can work with us if you're interested to streamline your processes and save time, especially on administrative efforts. Consultants can also give you process. We have tried and true methods that we've used with many organizations to successfully do succession planning. So we have many templates and strategies available to us that we can implement as in our expertise to support this in your organization. Then also give you accountability. Many times we do work with even HR leaders who are personally interested and invested in succession planning, but maybe they're having a hard time holding other people in your organization accountable. Investing in this process and working with a consultant can provide another strategic partner that will support holding you and other senior leaders accountable to your goals. Next is objectivity. We don't have any skin in the game when it comes to your organization, so we can be really unbiased and support decision-making that identifies the best candidates in your organization with the most objectivity, meaning the people who on paper and according to assessments are most likely to have success in the future, minimizing things that can and do happen in organizations such as favoritism or bias. And lastly, we have expertise. Our team has a number of PhDs in psychology and organizational psychology. So we really enjoy cultivating talent and supporting a strong culture. So we'd love to draw on our experiences with many clients who have been in your shoes in the past. So now we're curious to hear from you. I believe this may be the last poll of the session. What are the greatest challenges your team faces when it comes to strategic plans or succession planning? And in this case, you can select all that apply from time, buy-in, knowledge, standardization, having a dedicated team, and long-term commitment. So I'll just take a minute to let you go to menti.com and use the code 16703466. I'll give it another 30 seconds. All right. So time and long-term commitment are definitely the clear winners of the biggest challenges faced with this audience. Time is, again, the biggest one we often see, although I'm not surprised to see that long-term commitment one emerge as one of the top challenges as well, as it is challenging, especially without time, time and buy-in to have that long-term commitment. A few other challenges that were faced were buy-in, standardization, and having a dedicated team. And that dedicated team almost goes back to the time challenge again if you don't have someone available to take on that workload. Very interestingly, as I think this may have been one of the only groups where knowledge was not a challenge, so we must have some very knowledgeable people in our audience today. especially as some of you are already engaging in succession planning. So that's great. And to wrap up, we just want you to know that here at Sigma, we are here to help. So if you are just here today to learn more and get access to education and templates, we can definitely provide that. On our website, we have a succession planning guide as well as a succession planning training that is a free and available to anyone. So you can learn more about any specific stage of succession planning and get access to our carefully designed worksheets, checklists, and guides to help you organize your succession plan. You can also follow our 6-step process and implement and scale your own succession planning process. However, if you are having challenges implementing succession by yourself at your organization, we would love to support you. We have individualized consulting that we could work with our succession planning experts to walk through these steps one by one. We also provide a lot of administrative support on things like competency modeling for those success profiles. We provide ongoing support, and at the end, you can receive a detailed succession plan. So you can click on this or scan this QR code if you are interested, or just find your way over and browse our Sigma Assessment Systems website. One other thing that we want to mention is one of our most favored services, which is our succession planning launch. In this launch, we say that we can accomplish 6 months of work in 2 half-day workshops. So essentially, we bring in your team. So typically 10 critical roles to start, which people often start with their senior leadership teams, but it can depend on your organization's need. And then the first day, we cover the first 3 steps of our 6-step process. We provide a lot of administrative support in creating success profiles and a succession bench for everyone in the workshop. We come back in the second session, we validate those success profiles and benches, and then we talk about assessing talent, developing talent, and measuring progress. At the end of this, you could receive a detailed 12-month succession plan for everyone on your leadership team and take part in custom consulting. So feel free to reach out to me at athompson@sigmaleader.com if you have any other questions or are interested in learning more.
All right, and I'll pop back on to walk us through a little bit of Q&A. Feel free to continue using the Q&A box. You can post questions there anonymously as well as we go. Before we get started, I'm going to try posting this link in the Q&A as a discussion, just so that you have access to our 6 steps and some of these templates that Ariana has shared. Hopefully you can all see that. Yeah, you can download form fillable versions of these templates, which is very useful as you're walking through the steps. And then, as Ariana said, we also have the launch. So I will share the link for that with you as well.
Thanks, Alan.
No problem. Here we go. Okay. There's the launch. A little bit easier if you have a link. Okay, so first question from our audience is, here we go. The leadership and core competencies from our competency model that we shared are pretty general. How do we make sure that these competencies that we put on success profiles are specific to the actual critical role?
I could see how some of them could come across as general, such as valuing diversity or attracting staff, which we saw in that HR director's success profile. But these competencies are actually hand selected by the person in the role themselves, as well as people who see them in the role. And it is helpful to have some. So it tends to be 10 specific role competencies. I know we had a list of 10 as well for the leadership team, which can be important for the leadership team to consider what their group competencies are and how they want to function as a leadership team. But for that role specific competency list, we do find that these are helpful for people in developing the skills that they need. We haven't had many clients tell us that they're too broad or general. For example, you could be, if let's say you are having a hard time valuing diversity, and it's not for any negative reason in this scenario, but it's just you have too many tasks that you're dealing with. Let's say you are not as much of a strategic thinker, and so you're having a hard time prioritizing that competency of valuing diversity. Well, that's when you could work with a leader if you are on the bench for that role, and ask a leader to work with you to say, okay, what does it look like to value diversity? How can we make this actionable? How might this look in an HR role? And even if you are just an HR manager today and not an HR director, what are some ways you can start to model this competency and develop in this competency? So we actually do find that these are helpful starting places for people who want to develop into their next role. But then the granularity of how that actually plays out and what that looks like is as specific as the role and the organization. And we encourage this two-way street collaboration with the person who is currently in the role to help get that next generation leader up to speed on how to develop it and what it means.
Thanks, Ariana. I'll also just point out, and you'll see this when you download the template, but there is a section on the side of our success profiles that lets you fill out the duties, responsibilities, required education, certification, things like that. If you're thinking of the more technical aspects of a role, which you might find, if you're putting together a job description. So there is room to build that also into your success profiles. And then these competencies are from a leadership competency framework. So they give you the underlying leadership competency like analytical ability or formal presentation, but what that will look like for your specific role, you can specify in some of those duties along the left-hand side as well.
Thanks, Helen. Good point.
No problem. Okay, next up, this is a helpful question from one of our past webinars that I just thought I'd share while we wait for any other questions to trickle in. We mentioned not to delegate all of the succession planning work to one person. Who should be involved in the succession planning process?
Yeah, absolutely. It is very helpful to have an HR lead in the process. We often see also the participation from anyone if you have a talent and development program, anyone from L&D, people like that are great assets to your team. Additionally, it's great to have one or more executives who are supporting this initiative, who are, to build a culture of development, top-down buy-in as well to create capacity for learning, to support any resources that are needed to invest. We have one client of ours who it's strong in their culture that they like to send people to conferences, but the investment in talent and development does take time and energy, and creating a succession plan also requires some startup energy. The good thing is that we do believe that you're going to have an ROI on these efforts, and that you'll keep people more long-term. You'll have more successful leaders once they do occupy the next position. You've been preparing them to be a strong organizational leader. So hopefully you'll see that in your organizational functioning and returns. But just including any relevant stakeholders who can help spearhead and pioneer this initiative and help bring the energy, resources, and time that is truly required to make sure that it is ongoing and doesn't drop off over time.
Thanks, Ariana. I'll share another link in the Q&A for you there. We have a blog on how to create a succession advisory team. You might have heard that term at some point in the webinar. That's how we refer to that team that Ariana is talking about, who will be a part of the succession planning process with us or internally for your team. So there's a couple more details on that blog for who to consider and how to put a team like that together. Okay, we have time for, let's do one more question. Where do external candidates fit into the succession planning process?
Great question. We do get that one. So external candidates are interesting because sometimes they can add value depending on your context. We do recommend that you go the internal route first. Make sure that you have really assessed your current talent pool, you know what's available, you're giving opportunities, but there may be instances where hiring externally can be helpful. This is first and foremost the case typically when there are skill sets that you need or are looking for that you don't have in your organization. So if you're trying to create a new product or a new software or a new process within your organization, and you need a specific skill sets that are unavailable and hard to train in your organization, then that might be the case that you go external. There may be instances where nobody internally can meet the needs of the next role itself. We had one client recently where, due to the structure, they are a big organization, but they only have a staff of 8. So it was very specific, and all of those people kind of play different roles than the CEO who we were trying to replace for. So in that case, it was an instance where from the staff level, there wasn't a candidate available, but this organization was still interested in looking at their board of directors, people in their membership associations, things like that. So it wasn't even fully externally in this point, in this scenario, which I appreciate because there are often still benefits of going internally first, even when, you may have some other needs to examine.
Great, thank you very much. Okay. Well, I've got a couple of closing announcements. If any of you are here to get professional development credits for SHRM or ATD, please send me an email. Particularly for SHRM, I'll have to send you a certificate of completion and an activity code. So if you let me know that you would like that, I can forward it to you. If you enjoyed this webinar, take a look at the events calendar that we have on our website. We're running webinars monthly in 2024, and there's a range of topics from succession planning to talent development to how to use the 9-box coming up in June. So we'd love to see you again. And if there's anything that you would like to see that isn't on our site, then feel free to also send us an email. We do want these to be practical for you and the challenges that you're facing. So we'd love to incorporate your suggestions in our calendar for next year. And lastly, we do take a look at feedback surveys from our webinar, so I'll post the link in the Q&A for you as well. If you could take a minute to let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, we do take all of that feedback into account when we're updating our offerings, and we'd really appreciate it. If there's anything that we didn't get time to, any questions that you'd like to ask, continue to follow up with us via email. We're always happy to chat. And thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Ariana, as well, for being with us today. It was great to have you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.